Digital comics are a game changer. Now, don't get me wrong, my physical collection still grows by like a dozen issues every week or so, but something about having access to thousands upon thousands of comics in a small rectangle that fits in my pocket, it just works for me, especially as a busy dad. But my favorite app for reading digital comics right now is Global Comics. Global Comics is basically the home of indie comics. You've got publishers like Dynamite, Dark Horse, Image, and now DC. So if you can go to comicsaredope.com/global, you can actually save on their annual gold pass while supporting the channel. So again, visit comicsaredope.com/global to save. All right, guys. Well, I have a first time guest coming here to the show this evening, morning, whenever you're listening. But I'm really excited about this. When this person reached out to me, I was like, yo, of course, of course. And it was funny because I got the pitch separately. He reached out, and then like a publicist reached out about the book. And I was like, this book sounds like it's made specifically for me. And so I'm here to talk about the upcoming book, Ancestral Recall, with its writer, Mr. Jordan Clark. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. Yeah, it was funny. It was a perfect sort of marriage of events because you reached out one day and then the next day the publicity company reached out and I was like, actually, I just scheduled something.
Hmm.
So hey,
Synergy.
right, shout out to them doing their job. But yeah, so I'm excited because you are now the third Milestone Initiative alum to join the show. We had a friend of the channel, Morgan Hampton, up here. Greg
Hmm.
Burnham's been here.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm actually leaving someone out. I just see Anthony Fowler on the convention circuit all the time. He hasn't
Yeah.
dropped by the show just yet. Um, but yeah, we have a lot of fun here, and it's really cool just learning different people's journeys, backstories. And speaking of, I would love to know, a little bit more about you, Jordan. Where are you from?
So originally from Maryland, all of my family is from Chicago, so they moved to Maryland like maybe a month or two before I was born.
Mm,
So I started out growing up closer to DC, but now I live in Baltimore. I've been in Baltimore for the last 12, 13 years.
got you. I have family in like PG County. Um,
Oh, okay.
and I don't really know anything about it except that they like to yell PG and young. Like that's the thing.
Yep, yep. No, I think I don't know why this has stuck with me as long as it has, but in like second or third grade, we had pen pals. Like they just set us up with kids from different schools, like
Mm,
from different states. And the note that I got was basically like, "Oh, you live in Maryland, so do you live on a farm?" And I was like, "Huh, is that what everybody else thinks Maryland is like?" So yeah, I mean, DC, PG County, Montgomery County, kind of their own thing. I'm sure on top of all the other things they've talked to you about go-go and
mhm.
mumbo sauce and all the other various
Right,
regional things. So
right.
Baltimore, we're a little bit, it's not like we're completely separate, but we've got a little variation. We got our own thing going on.
Got you, got you. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious to know like what it's like growing up in Baltimore. I feel like a lot of people may know of Baltimore from The Wire, and that's like it.
Mm.
But what is it like on a day to day? How was it for you, just kind of in your formative years?
Yeah, so growing up, I grew up closer to DC, so around like Montgomery County. So
Okay.
no, I mean I was I would say probably typical suburban, upbringing.
Hmm.
Um, and then I moved to Baltimore for college and went to Morgan State University.
Okay.
And, you know, again, yes, very much everybody knows The Wire and like a lot of those things. But I would say Baltimore, very much like any other city, where like obviously there's places you don't want to be at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But generally on a day-to-day basis, I would say Baltimore is much more of an art city than people recognize it for. I mean, we've got Micah, which is like a renowned arts college, but then we also have like there was a whole mural project that happened in the 70s So there's like all of these murals throughout the city of either historical Black figures or local figures or just like really interesting art that goes around. We've got a festival called Artscape, which is like one of the biggest outdoor art festivals in the country. Um, Crabs, obviously,
Right.
but I think, if you come to Baltimore and you're expecting The Wire, like, yes, again, similar to like say parts of New York City or Chicago where you go around and you're like, this probably isn't great,
Right.
probably not a place I want to hang out too much, but there's other places that you go and you'd be really surprised just to see how vibrant the city is, but also just like the people here. Like, again, I'm sure, there's some expectations of how people are, but like I found Baltimore to be a very friendly city and just a very interesting, engaging city. It's one of the few remaining majority Black cities. So like, it's very interesting just to go anywhere you go. Like, not only are there Black people there, but like we're doing everything. We're at the art museums, we're at the farmers markets, we're at the, fairs and festivals. So it's just kind of nice to be in a city that has a strong cultural grounding. And then also, again, I mean, I know people probably remember everything that happens with Freddie Gray,
Yeah.
in that situation. And like Baltimore is still also a fiercely political city. So, you come here and I think you'll find just a wide variety of things. So, I'm very happy living here in Baltimore because I feel like it's one of those places like Detroit, like Oakland, like New Orleans, where people probably have a preconceived idea of what it's like, but the people who live there like really appreciate and love the city.
Nice, nice. So you went to Morgan State. What were you there to study?
I studied broadcast journalism. It was a very interesting journey because I started out as a music engineering major at Hampton University. And they were like, so part of this is like taking actual engineering classes. And I was like, oh, I did this so I didn't have to do math. So this isn't really gonna work out. Um, but I've always loved stories and storytelling, and I think what attracted me to journalism was just like the idea of being able to uncover, different stories from people. I think some of the things that I love the most, whether it's investigative journalism, sports journalism, comics journalism, entertainment journalism, is like uncovering these stories from people that you would have had no clue about, right? You know what I mean? Like there's so much great writing and work, and it's a really delicate process because there's a line of like, obviously you don't want to become the story or be a part of the story as the storyteller, but so much of the story is your ability to tell it and how to craft it. Because you can have a really interesting story and tell it in a way that people are like, okay, but you could have, even if it's not the most interesting story, if you're just a great storyteller, you know what I mean? Like you can really draw people in. So I did broadcast journalism. I worked in television for, a couple of years. I think, it was a lot of freelance stuff, and that can be great when it's going well, and that can be really draining when you're not working for 3 or 4 weeks and you're like, these bills, man, they're coming. They're not going away.
Mhm.
So
So that's interesting. It's funny because I had been researching for an Al Letson interview, who's writing the Mr. Terrific Year One
Mhm.
series right now, but he's also host of Reveal, a podcast, which like basically investigative journalism. And it's funny because I had been out of podcasts basically since the pandemic. That used to be what I would
Mm.
do for my, you know, daily commute. Now I commute 4 steps to my office and home. So there's not a lot of time for it. But it immediately kind of drew me in, like because they're talking about like, okay, well, here's how, the movement to install different people in the board of directors in colleges started. And here's, you know, where we are in the water crisis and stuff like that. And, we see these headlines all the time. But what I like about that podcast is they're talking to the people on the ground, right?
Mhm.
It's like, oh, well, here's this lady that wrote this book about this specific county in America. Let me ask her about specific people's stories and what she learned. And I think it's interesting to sort of draw other people's stories out of them to kind of be able to curate them in a way, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like, as the reporter, you choose what gets amplified about their story. And I'm curious to know, like, just as a writer, the difference between doing that and then giving a character a story, like in creative writing, does it feel different? Do you feel like one informs or helps the other?
I think it can be helpful, because journalism obviously has a lot of rules and safeguards, in order to like certain things you're not supposed to do. I
Mm,
know journalism has changed, or just media has changed a lot in the last couple of years. But I think I mean, there's certain protocols just in terms of not only just like protecting your source, but the way that you should go about, telling the story. Again, you don't necessarily want to be too focused on yourself. You don't want to be dry with it, but you certainly don't want to be. And I mean, obviously, we've seen in the last decade or so, there's been a number of journalists who've just made a story up, whole cloth, and that's been, a huge scandal. But I think just that the ability to speak with somebody and kind of draw, like you were saying, draw the story out, and really consider all the facts and pieces, I think does help because there are people like, I know Brian Michael Bendis was into journalism before he became a writer, a comics writer. And a few other people have had similar stories, where, I mean, even David Simons, who did the Wire, was,
mm,
a longtime journalist here in Baltimore. I think it really does help. I would say the number one thing it probably helps with is really just the human side of things, because you do really have to consider the person at the center of the story. It is a weird profession because you do oftentimes come upon people in very traumatic, or, like very heightened moments in their life. You know what I mean? Like if you were, say, reporting on something like, Hurricane Katrina or any other natural disaster, if you're reporting on, somebody who, had a loved one pass away, like you're coming into their life, basically at, a very heightened traumatic moment, and having to speak with them, but then also, be humane in the way that you portray them, right? Like you don't want to necessarily, even if they say something crazy to you, you know what I mean? You have to take that in a leveled way and figure out the best way to come back with it. And so for me, I think a lot of the things that I learned and applied to the writing that I do now is really just trying to think about this in a way where, I have a character, I have somebody, and there's going to be a lot of different sides to them. And, having that selectiveness of like, what do I need to include in the story to really get across, the themes, the ideas, the messages, and what are some things that are like good to know, but maybe for me and the reader doesn't necessarily need to have that information, because it's not necessarily going to, get the story across, but it might, for me, help dictate the way that I portray them in certain moments.
got you. Do you, I guess anyone would, right? Like, I feel like being a person being interviewed, it can be difficult to see like what the final result is. I guess a good journalist is going to give you the heart of the conversation, but I can imagine the person being interviewed is like, well, I wanted you to talk about this, or I said all of this and you edited it down to that. How do you sort of balance the goal of the narrative of the story you're telling with, the that person on the other side of it?
It can be difficult sometimes just because of the ultimate say may not be yours. You know what I mean?
Mm,
If it's a newspaper, if it's a magazine, if it's a television program, like plenty of times we've seen the full clip, the full interview, and then what was ultimately selected to be, presented, either because, this is a 30-minute interview that had to be boiled down to a 10-minute segment. This is, like 4 or 5 days for a magazine, talking with this person, following this person, that had to be, boiled down to like 15, 20 pages, so you really have to be selective of it. And, oftentimes too, depending on who you're talking to, they might have come into the situation with a very specific purpose of how they want to be portrayed.
Hmm.
But your job ultimately as a journalist is to tell the story that's in front of you, right? And so, for example, obviously, I mean, we could just make something up. If you're speaking to an athlete, and they really want to talk about, hey, season's coming up, XYZ, like let's really, talk about how I'm going to come back and, win a championship. And then, a story breaks about them having, potentially been involved in some not great behavior with, a significant other or, drugs or something else like that. Like, yes, you don't want to be totally scandalous with
Hmm.
it, unless you're like a TMZ or whatever. But also it's a bit disingenuous if everybody's like, I want to talk about this. I want to hear about this, and you're doing more or less a puff piece on this person. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
sometimes that can be burning a bridge, which you got to kind of pick and choose if it's worth doing that.
Hmm.
But I think ultimately, it does. There's a variety of factors that come into it. I think obviously, if you're speaking to somebody, you always want to go into it with the best intentions, but sometimes throughout the course of a conversation, it might be like, well, I kind of can't not,
Yeah.
talk about this or include this. So
Got you. So, audio engineering to broadcast journalism, right? If I try really hard, I can, not even that hard, I can see parallels, right? Like I do
yeah,
sound tech for my church. And you're right. Audio engineering, if you really want to learn the craft of it, is very technical, right? You're like, oh, a bass sound wave is 15 feet long and there's all these many reverber. Like there's a lot of math, there's a lot of different elements to it. That could be kind of weird, right? When
yeah,
really most of the job of a good sound tech is turning the volume up to the right level and maybe panning a little bit,
yeah,
right? But overall, the role of a sound tech is basically to play the band. Like everybody
mm,
that's got an instrument, they've got to play it to the best of their ability. But I've got to be the one that decides, okay, we're going to turn up the guitar a little bit here and we're going to turn down the bass and so on, right? And in journalism, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you're not necessarily driving the story, you're helping to draw a story out from other people, but you've got to be the one that decides, all right, this needs to be heard, this needs to be seen, right? But then taking that leap into creative writing, what was it about creative writing that kind of drew you in? Because you've been doing comics for a little bit now.
yeah. I think for me, a couple of factors played a role. I was big into comics as a kid, and then like as I got older, like sports and like other things kind of took over for that. But then when I got to Morgan, I had a professor who was like super nerd, like had was telling us about, Doctor Who, was telling us about all these like 70s sci-fi shows, was, telling us about all these comics that had come out or are coming out, like gave me Watchmen to read, like, told me about a couple other things. And so that got me hooked back in, big time into comics. And so, so I was getting ready to leave college. Like I had a lot of ideas for stories that I wanted to tell. And foolishly at the time, I was like, you know, movies and, TV shows and even like YouTube stuff, like that's cool. And like maybe I can do that, but that also costs a lot of money. It involves a lot of people. It seems like a lot of effort. Comics is just me and another person. And like that's cheaper. And like I can do that. And like, not necessarily the cheapest, like cheaper than producing a television show, but like
Right.
there's still money that needs to get put down for a variety of things. But it did kind of draw me in because I think the thing that I really enjoyed and still do enjoy most about comics is that it's one of the most unfiltered creative processes left, because movies, plays, novels, I think, are maybe the closest thing of just like your brain to, the page,
Hmm.
and also, music as well. But like if you're making a movie, you might write the movie, but that can get changed by the director, by the editor, you know, changed by just how somebody performs the lines, all
Mhm.
of these things. So like what you wrote on the page is going to be way different from what the actual film is, right? Um, Same thing goes for television. You know, even in a play, you could write the play, but the way that somebody chooses to direct it, the way that somebody chooses to perform it, you know, it could be very different. Comics, yes, you know, specifically if you're doing the whole thing, you know, that's all you. That's like if you're writing, drawing, lettering, coloring, like you can really get some really incredible work from people. For me, though, it is nice to have that collaborative process with another person who can put something in there that maybe I wouldn't have or couldn't see, you know, just as the writer. But that drew me in with all of these stories that I had because I was like, this is something that I can do. The entry level is pretty low, you know, in terms of like I don't need a degree or anything, you know, crazy to get in. Like I just need a collaborator. And so I started to find people, you know, small, quick things that were like, you know, 5 pages or, you know, like a web comic that we could put out like 1 or 2 pages at a time. Um, but that was really the thing that drew me in the most was just like I have these stories. What's the best medium to tell them in? And comics just felt like the most natural fit.
Got you. And so you start out basically self-publishing. What was the sort of ladder into the industry like for you? And were there resources that you kind of looked for? Like, I don't know, whether it was how to script a comic or maybe there was a mentor. How did that work for you?
Comics is still a very interesting place where if you want to know how to do it, there's so many resources, there's so many books, there's so many, you know, like there's Understanding Comics. There's Brian Bendis's book about, you know, making comics. There's Will Eisner's series of books about making comics. So like I basically just found every resource possible at books, podcast interviews, YouTube videos, like anything I could get my hands on and just sat down and read it. Um, the thing I remember, you know, it's very strange just to have to navigate other people's life decisions because I found the thing that I found that really gave me the biggest insight was from Sandman, one of the volumes
Yeah.
where you have Neil Gaiman's script in the back.
Hmm.
And so I was like, well, this is how you write a comic book script. You know, so I was trying to write like Neil Gaiman.
Hmm.
And I was like, this doesn't work because I'm not him.
Right.
So I don't really know what to do. But I think there was a really interesting process in that where because there's so much self-discovery that I think for anybody who's doing something creative, you're kind of always looking at the people who are, you know, near the top of any industry trying to figure out, well, how do they do that? How do they make that? How does that work?
Hmm.
Um, and so I was really just like anywhere, everywhere. And as far as mentors go, I did happen to stumble into a situation where Kelly Sue DeConnick was coming to a comic book shop near me when Pretty Deadly was coming out. You know, I had read Captain Marvel and I was like, here's a real live person
Hmm.
that I can go and speak to. And she's an incredible person because she not only did a signing, but that she came back and did a workshop after. And I sat down at the workshop and, you know, everything that she was saying, like I literally went across the street to a CVS and bought like a notebook and like all of the stuff to like sit down and get ready to like take like 20 pages of notes. And by the time it was over, I had taken like a page and a half because I'd read all this stuff before. I'd heard all this stuff before. I'd seen all this stuff before. But the
Hmm.
number one thing that she said was like, everyone here should go make a comic, you know, and that was the one thing I hadn't done yet. I had done everything else, but actually making the thing. And that was kind of the push that got me to just start creating and like start trial and error, like seeing what worked. Fast forward like 3 or 4 years, I meet her again at Heroes Con, and
Hmm.
she's, you know, signing. Little Bitch Planet is, uh, I think, just finished its first, you know, 5, 6 issues. And so I go up to her and I, give her some of the stuff that I'd done and just chat her up and like thank her. She takes my work, she's looking at it while we're talking. She's like kind of like just offhandedly passes it to her editor who's behind her. I see her tomorrow, the next day, and she's like, "Hey, you're Jordan, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she's like, this is like I was writing through, the book that you gave me. My editor, Lauren, like she was reading it. She was like, "Oh, this is great." Like she really loved it. And we just talked a little bit more and like I left that con feeling great, but also like I'm never going to talk to her again. Like that was just a really nice moment that
Mm,
happened. Fast forward maybe like 3 weeks and I get an email from her and her team because they're doing the Bitch Planet triple feature.
mm,
And she's like, I would like you if you would write a story for us for that, pitch us something. Um, and so it was really just a matter of like right place, right time, right? Because like if I hadn't have been working, if I didn't have, stuff to show, if I hadn't gone through, all the effort, because what I did was I put together a 5 or 6 story anthology where I
mm,
found like 5 or 6 different artists. I had like a theme about technology and the internet, and I just wrote 5 or 6 page stories, put them together. So that's what I gave to her. But like if I hadn't been working on that, then I don't have anything. I go up to her and I say, "Hey, it's nice to meet you again," yada yada. If she doesn't have anything happening, she takes my book and says, "This is pretty good." And then we don't
mhm.
speak again. But it was just like one of those moments where, you've been doing the work and then there's an opportunity and then those two things come together. And then from there, I've been lucky enough to, you know, get connections with DC, do some stuff for Dynamite, do some stuff some other places, but that's really like that moment of somebody reaching down to say, "Hey, I see the potential, and I'd like to give you an opportunity," but also like not just waiting for an opportunity, like creating and doing stuff and being prepared for when that moment comes so that you can take it and run with it.
For sure. I Something that kind of surprises me about comics as a community is how much people are willing to help, right? Like,
Hmm.
even just with the crazy amount of resources that are available, right? You talk about understanding comics. Scott McCloud, Brian Michael Bendis wrote a book about, writing comics. I just got in the mail writing for comics with Peter David, which,
Hmm.
is a very interesting resource. It's almost like it's written for kids to discover at a library, but I was
Hmm.
surprised at just how much like there's the idea of being a writer. There's, oh, where do you get ideas from? Like idea generation and stuff like that. All the way down to, all right, when it's time for you to pitch, here are some P.O. box addresses that accept submissions. And I was like, wow,
Hmm.
you could have just gotten all of that at a library. It's not as crazy as like, I don't know, trying to get a record deal or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's cool to me. Between that and there's people just being willing to, because most people that I talk to is a very similar situation. Uh, I can't even remember who it was that Morgan met at a comic shop and just like struck it up, kept emailing back and forth, right? There's plenty of people that'll meet, at cons and get contact information or like have a portfolio review. Like it's the comics people, comics pros are like always looking for more comics pros. And I guess it's because it's so collaborative. And
Hmm.
you want to work with good people, so that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that on top of all that, I mean, any creative industry can kind of be isolating, but like comics more than most, whether you're a writer or an artist, like you're spending long hours by yourself,
Hmm.
just kind of like grinding it out. And I think a lot of people do have very clear memories of, I was this person not that long ago. You know what I mean? I was at cons handing out books. I was, just trying to get something in the right person's hands or make those connections. And, like not everybody's in the position, to make those connections. Obviously, like I said, Kelly Sue just wasn't writing a book at the time. You know what I mean? Like again, nice to meet you. It's great. Thanks. Keep at it. But there's not really anything there. But I think a lot of people do when they see chances to reach back because I think all of us subconsciously know like we're still in a niche market, a niche industry, and like we need people, like if there's only five, six people doing this at a really high level, what's that? Like you
Yeah.
really need to have new voices, new people continuously coming in because it lifts all the boats. Everybody is better off if you have a healthy, robust industry where people are excited to go to the shop and buy books and spend money instead of just saying, oh, well, I guess I'll just wait until, so and so has a new project because you really want to get as much it's diversity, but it's also just like ideas, like really talented, creative people. These are people who, if specifically if you're a writer and you see an artist, you're like, if I can get on the train early, before
Hmm.
this really takes off, it's a good, give and take of like, this is somebody who can have a long career, but also, I'm able to, collaborate with somebody who's really talented. And so I think comics like a lot of other industries, there's gatekeeping and there's all kinds of stuff. Like, not everything's perfect, but I think because we understand on a higher level, like we all kind of need each other. So like the more of us that are working and doing great work, the better the industry is, the better we all are.
For sure. And so I'm going to fast forward just a little bit, right? Because um 2020, rolls around, Milestone returns, and they announce that they're doing this Milestone Initiative for the uninitiated. Basically, this was a kind of talent development, like sort of incubator program. They chose writers and artists after like a pretty rigorous application and interview selection process, and they put them through different classes. I want to say there's like online classes at the Kubert School,
Mhm.
um, and then they got to visit the DC headquarters and do some workshops in person as well, all with mentors from the comics industry, led by Dennis Cowan and Reggie Hudlin. But there's other names. It's like a who's who of really talented comics pros. So you see that this program is happening, and at this point, you're already a published writer. Not just some indie anthology somewhere, but you've got credits at DC. What is it that makes you say, you know what, I want to try out for this?
I think first and foremost, it's the milestone of it all. Like that got my attention where I was like, okay, because I grew up in the 90s, and so I didn't really get into Milestone comics,
Hmm.
until a little bit later. But, Static Shock cartoon, big deal, like really enjoyed that. And I was aware of Milestone. I mean, the biggest obstacle for me is when I was growing up, we didn't really have comic book shops around where I live. So it wasn't something where I could just go and like pick up an issue, but like
Hmm.
I'd see the Milestone characters from time to time. And you know, later on, I mean, obviously, you think about Reggie, you think about Dwayne McDuffie, you think about people like John Paul Leon and some just like absolute incredible creative people who came out of Milestone, who created Milestone, and really what Milestone stood for, when it was at its height, which was yes, black creatives and black storytelling, but like they were image before image. They were, a group of people who said, we need to get our own, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
how can we make this for us and really stand out from not necessarily just like the superhero crowd, but like we're about ownership. We're about, you know, having the kind of creativity where we're not shackled by, certain things that will restrict the way that we can tell these stories.
Hmm.
And they bet on themselves and they bet very correctly that
Yeah.
people would really want to be into that and lift that up. And so I think just seeing that coming back and seeing it coming back with, Reggie and Dennis, like being able to have the ability to have some connection to them, you know what I mean, was something that I was very interested in. But then, on top of it, everything else that you were just talking about, right? Like even at that point where I was, comics felt not like a mystery, but it was still like, the work wasn't consistent. It wasn't like,
Mhm.
oh, well, I did this, so like this is gonna happen next, or like I did this and this is gonna happen next. Like the first thing I did, I had the assumption that the inbox was just gonna blow up because my
Mhm.
name's in a book, and so like now let's go, and it was like, oh, still gotta do not even just more, but like it doesn't stop. Like you have to
Mhm.
consistently be working with editors, but coming up with stories and like, people's time kind of comes and goes. I mean, there's people you see all the time where you're just like, well, what happened to so and so? You know what I mean? Because like I
Mhm.
loved their work and like, it was kind of like they had a real hot streak of, a couple of years and then maybe not so much, but then they come back, a couple of years later. And I think it's really about being able to uh, have that endurance to kind of keep going, but also, having a knowledge of how the industry works. Once you're on the inside and you realize like, oh, like this editor went here and then, this thing happens, internally. And so they had to push that back or move this around. And it's like, this all makes sense, right? But from the outside looking in, you're like, I don't know how any of this works. So like,
Right.
I think it was really the ability to have, an inside look, specifically if we're talking about Milestone and DC, like a really big comics publisher, understanding how they make decisions, understanding how a lot of those technical things work that you don't really think about in terms of like marketing, in terms of communicating with comic book shops, in terms of just like the internal workings of the industry. Like it was really eye-opening just to have an opportunity to see that up close. And so that's what caught my eye. It was like, all right, if it's Milestone, I need to try to figure out how I can get into this. But then all of the other things they were offering was also very, intriguing to me just because like if I can learn anything, I mean, if I can take anything away from this and apply it to my career, like I would love to have that opportunity. So
For sure. And I wanted to ask you what maybe the standout lessons were from your time in the initiative.
yeah, I think first and foremost, one of the things that I'm most grateful for is just the connections and the friendships that I made coming out of that because one of my collaborators for the new book, Adigan, was
Mhm.
also, a member of the Milestone Initiative. So like being able to meet him there was great. Meeting, Morgan, meeting Gerardo, meeting Greg, like Julio, bunch of other people. I could go down the whole name
Right.
list, but like everybody there shared the same passion, for comics. And I think all of us, whether we were relatively new or whether we had been doing it for a while, I think it was great just to be able to be a part of something together. You know what I mean? Like we still have a Discord that we are all on, talking to each other and like communicating, supporting each other, like it's really I think it's really important to me and I feel like it's really important to all of us just to be able to have that connection and feel like, we every win, every like opportunity that one of us gets feels like something that we all accomplished because I think we're just rooting for each other to keep going and like keep having a presence. And you see like Ashley Allen is writing Magic now. Julio did the Blue Beetle book and is working on some other stuff, some middle grade stuff. Morgan's doing Green Lantern stuff now. Charles Stewart, did a couple of milestone things. Adigan did, Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
So like
Shadow
the
Cabinet.
list goes on of all these people, yeah, who like got in and then like it wasn't like, what, never see them again. It's like, no, like all of us are still here doing all of these things. So I think that's the biggest thing that I took away from it. I think the second thing was, for me, and I would say for a lot of people, obviously when you're getting into the industry, the number one thing that is in your brain is like, man, how can I write Spider-Man? How can I write X-Men? How can I write Batman? Like, how can I get onto these really big projects? And understanding that, yes, awesome to do it, right? But also understanding that like eventually the toys get put back in the box and then it's somebody else's turn,
Mhm.
and so like you can't be stagnant waiting around for somebody to say, "Hey, I remember you. You know, you did such and such or whatever." Like it was nice seeing you again. Here's, you know, a 50 issue run of Superman. You know, it's like
Mm,
you got to stay active, you got to stay working, you got to stay moving. And like sometimes opportunities come your way. Like I've had a few things offered to me that I was like, this sounds great, let's do it. And then something fell through, editor moved on, um, you know, just whatever the situation was. And it's very easy to be like, well, what now? You know what I mean? Like that opportunity is gone, or that opportunity has changed, or that opportunity was the opportunity. Like, oh man, if I had gotten to do that, then I would have done whatever.
mhm,
And having that mindset, I think, can kind of get you stuck, you know, because you're kind of, it's not even about not expecting things, but it is about being able to kind of roll with a lot of the punches that the industry throws your way, where, you know, you can't ever just say, this next thing is going to be, you know, the thing that gets me that movie deal or whatever it is. You know, it's like until that next thing is on the shelves and like out in the world and like you're talking about it with people, you're signing that book that's in your hands. Like you always have to be ready, not for something to fall through, but you have to be ready to say, if this doesn't work out, what's plan B, C, D, E? Like, would I kickstart it? Is there another, you know, publisher I can go to? Like, how can I keep moving? And you can see, you know, Dennis, Reggie, like they really embody that hustle because both of those guys are two guys who like never stopped
yeah,
moving at all. You know what I mean? They were always there for the next opportunity. And they were not afraid to say no to opportunities they didn't think represented them in the way that they wanted to be represented. And I think that's maybe the last lesson is like, you know, it's very easy to say yes to everything, specifically when you're young and just getting into the industry because you want to say yes to everything.
right.
But I remember a conversation I had with Greg Pak, and I was talking to him, and he was saying, you know, one of the things I regretted the most early on was saying yes to all the things that Marvel was giving to me and not, you know, doing some more creator-owned opportunities because even though all of the books that he did, you know, he loved working on. It was like I got to the end of it and it was like all of these ideas and all this energy that I would have had for books of my own. I just didn't have it anymore because I was doing three, four, you know, books over here, like continuing to say yes to all these projects. Sometimes having just the foresight to say, you know what, I don't, that's great. I don't think I'm either the right person for that, or I think I've already got too much on my plate, or I have an opportunity to do something for myself. Um, because you see a lot of those people who, you know, really built up that creator-owned side of their portfolio and like not only have stuff to lean back on, you know, or return to, because that was kind of his point too, is like when the Marvel work dried up that was it. You know, it wasn't like, oh, you remember that thing I'd been working on, you know, at you know, Image or Dark Horse or over here. Like now I could just jump back and do more of that. You know, it's like, oh, okay. Now I kind of have to get to the back of the line and like work my way back in, or start from scratch and create something new and hope that somebody wants to pick it up. So I think all of those things are things that I took away from that experience. And again, like it flew by. Like we spent a week there at the DC headquarters and it felt like no time at all. Like by the time we were back on the plane, I was like, man, I could do that for like 3 more weeks.
Right.
So,
Man. Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the camaraderie of it all, right? And how you guys still keep up with one another. I've been to several cons since, and it's like if I see one of you, I'm gonna see at least five of you. Whoever's there, it's
mhm.
like they're congregating together. That's how I met Damien last year
Yeah,
at
yeah.
New York Comic Con. Because I'm like, it's Morgan, Damien, um, whose table were we at? We were standing at Anthony's table, and
Okay.
it was like the whole time we're there, we're trying to figure out where Nick Draper Ivy is, who was not in the initiative.
Mm.
Just he was drawing static at the time. And it's like, yeah, he's popping up. He's here. He was there. I don't know. But it was just funny because like that's the group was just all there. Like, oh wait, have you met this one yet? You met this person? And it's like it's almost it feels like a family reunion when I go to a comic convention. It's really cool that way. I was gonna ask you about sort of navigating career post incubator, but you've talked about it, right? It's really just about having the hustle, not sort of resting on your laurels, not being like, oh, well, I did that, so people are going to come calling.
Yeah.
And this project that we're here to talk about, Ancestral Recall, is actually with Ahoy Comics, and I have to imagine it was like you have this idea, and it's like, well, how do I find a partner to help bring this to life? How do you end up at Ahoy with this project?
So it's another interesting milestone connection because Darren Bennett of Annual Design was one of
Hmm.
the people who came and talked to us about lettering and all this stuff. And I had seen him a couple times because he was at the Ahoy booth and kind of working with them. And, at C2E2, after the initiative had ended, I came up to the table and we were just kind of chatting about stuff. And he was like, I can't guarantee anything, obviously, but like if you ever have anything and you'd like to, send me a pitch, let me know. And like maybe, I could get in somebody's hands and move it up the ladder. And at the time, I didn't really have anything, but I had so at with the Milestone Initiative when we went to DC, they had us do, a couple of different workshops, and one of the things was a character creation exercise where, we were broken up into teams and we had to make uh a hero and a villain, right? And
Hmm.
so like, two people were paired together to make the hero, two people were paired together to make the villain. The character that became Melvin, the main character of Ancestral Recall, was my hero idea. But obviously I had to do the villain because somebody else went out on the hero side. So but I had that idea in the back of my head and I kind of been thinking about it since then. And so, I was like, I think I got something. I think I can put something together pretty quick. And so maybe a couple of weeks later, I kind of had a quick and dirty pitch, sent it to Darren. Darren looked at it. He was like, this is great. Maybe like tweak this, that, send it back to me, in the official format. So I did that. Um, but that was the connection. And then like, I heard back from them maybe like a month or so later and they're like, this sounds great. And from there, they were like, do you have an artist in mind? And similar situation to when I was talking to Darren, I was like, I don't know if it's true, but I'm just going to say that Adigan can do this. And Adigan, again, it's another interesting connection because Adigan was finishing his Master's of Fine Arts at Syracuse University. And Tom Peyer, who is one of the heads at Ahoy, uh, was also at Syracuse. And so like they already knew each other.
Hmm.
And so it was just one of those, like synergy things of like, oh, all of this is kind of just lining up very quickly. And so we were able to kind of put it all together. But another right place, right time kind of situation. Because if I don't go over to just chat up Darren, not even about pitching anything, just talking to him, and he's not, like, hey, we got something open possibly. Why don't you pitch me something? Like, and I wasn't, thinking quickly and like, I don't have the whole thing, but I got like 75% of a thing, so
Hmm.
like let me just very quickly throw this together. It's another, again, fortunate right place, right time kind of situation. And Ahoy is a very interesting publisher in the sense that, when you think about the dark horses and you think about the booms and the Onis and a lot of these longer standing established publishers, like Ahoy may not have the same kind of infrastructure built in, just because they haven't been around as long as them. But there's a real dedication and care to each book. Like each book they put out, because they don't put out 40 books, they only put out a handful of books at a time. Each book gets the utmost, care and presentation. So like it's really nice to be at a place where it doesn't feel like you're kind of lost in, the myriad of other things they have going on. Like when it's your turn, you're the priority. They're pushing that. They want to get that out in the world. So I think it was a really good match, in terms of finding a place because for your first creator-owned book, you do kind of want to feel like you have the full push and support of the publisher and aren't just kind of like a name they signed up because it sounds good. And, they throw the book out in the world and then you just gotta, fingers crossed, hope and pray that it catches on.
Right. And so with that, Ancestral Recall, you know, we've got it up, got it running. The first issue comes out August the 6th, and final order cutoff for that issue is July 7th, if my sources are correct. So
That is
we're
correct.
humming, cool. We're humming along. And now it's time to hype it up for the crowd out there. What is Ancestral Recall about?
Ancestral Recall is the story of Melvin Waring, who is a eccentric, reclusive painter who, has color was really big in the 80s and the 90s and then kind of fell out of the public light. And so, he's doing his thing in Oakland and comes across just a weird series of events. People have started to go missing. His younger neighbor is like telling him there's a lot of crazy, strange things going on. He's got tunnel vision, doesn't really want to pay attention to that. But when his wife ends up being one of those people who goes missing, he taps into, I haven't really given it a name yet. I'm going with the ancestral web. I think that sounds cool. He's able to tap into this ancestral web, which gives him the power and the ability to commune with different Black historical figures. And so he's able to, whatever knowledge they might have, whatever skills and abilities they might have, um, I've been thinking about it. It's kind of like Dial H for Black people,
Mm,
where you're able to just kind of like at a moment's notice tap into this ability. Um, and he uses those skills to unravel the mystery of all of these missing people from his neighborhood.
yeah, I've read the first issue. I won't spoil anything here for you guys, but I will say it's really interesting. The concept, right, when it was pitched to me in email, I was like, oh, this sounds like something I'd be all over, right?
Mhm.
So my major in college was marketing. But as a way to get myself out of bed, I started taking African American history classes. So that was my minor. I took so many courses that they were like, if you stay another semester, you can have a dual degree. And I didn't stay
Mm.
another semester. But but it's just something, it was something about like just history that we never learned growing up, or at least
Hmm.
I didn't, right? So much that I know about, our history, I didn't learn until I was taking college courses on it. Um, you open this book with a quote from Ozzie Davis. Says, I find in being black a thing of beauty, a joy, a strength, a secret cup of gladness. What does that quote mean to you, and why did you feel it was important for this to open the book?
I really wanted to bring as much of the real world into this story as possible. And so, having quotes like that, and then again, having some figures from real history that people may have no idea ever existed, I think are two of the things that I was really focused on. And so I wanted to find something that almost felt like a mission statement, in terms
Mm,
of how I want people to approach the book and the way that I think about it. Because, like you were saying, I feel that is really how a lot of us come upon Black history, even as Black people, a lot of
mm,
the stuff that we learn in school is either a half truth or not the truth, or
mm,
we're kind of just totally omitting whole periods of time, people, events. And so, you know, Ozzie Davis, one, just an incredible person, activist, and person who I really feel like if you don't know Ozzie Davis, like it's somebody that you should definitely look up. One of my hopes is that as people go through the book, as they see names, as they kind of hear these quotes and see these things and say, "Who's that? Let me go take a bit of a deeper dive into that." But I think particularly what he's speaking about there, especially that secret cup of gladness, right? Is like I
mm,
think for a lot of us, there's there can be moments where like it's hard. It's hard being Black in this
mm,
country and other countries, throughout history. But there's also, just kind of this continuous strength that we can pull from that as
mm,
well. And, the way that we the way that we see ourselves and frame ourselves, I think can really make a big difference, right? Like
mm,
there's obviously a way to look at it, throughout a lens of, oppression and discrimination and hardship. And it's important not to necessarily lose sight of that, but there's
Mhm.
also another lens to look at it through of just like, and we're still here. And look at all of the things that we did, and look at all the things that we continue to do, and look at, this amazing history that we've built in this country and that we continue to be a part of. And so that's kind of the way that I choose to see, Black history and Black people in this country. Is just kind of like, it's not always been a great journey
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, but like there's so much to be proud of. There's so much to be happy about. There's so much to look at and reflect upon and feel like you're part of a larger tapestry of just this incredible story. And so, I wanted people to start off just with that mindset of like, when we think about ourselves, how do we think about ourselves? Is it positive? Is it negative? Like I'm choosing the positive, but also like I'm wanting people to have a particular frame of mind going into that first issue and then the rest of the series. Because, Melvin's journey isn't always going to be great. But, from the quotes to the historical figures, I wanted to choose things that really got people in a particular frame of mind for that story, but then for the series at large.
for sure. I think what it evokes for me is like just kind of the sense of joy, right? Like I guess Black Boy Joy is a tag now, but
Yeah.
there really is like a sort of pride like that I get from being Black. And like you said, like just tapping into history. I went to college in Greensboro. I didn't go to A&T. Um my brother did, and I was just there for my sister's graduation. And so we decided to stop at the International Civil Rights Center and Museum,
Hmm.
which they opened while I was in school. And basically, it's the Woolworths. Have you ever seen like the sit-in at the Woolworths lunch counter? That happened in Greensboro, and they've taken that building and turned it into a Black History Museum. And so it's a really small museum. You can get through it in like 2 hours if you wanted to, or you can stand there and really take your time through the exhibits. And so I'm there and we're going through this exhibit and we stumble on like the first Black man who was allowed to practice medicine at the White Hospital in Greensboro. And the name sounds familiar. And I'm like, well, I'm sure there's plenty of people with that name. And then the dude's picture pops up and I'm like, yo. So I text my best friend who's living in Oakland right now. And I'm like, yo, is this your uncle's dad? And he was like, oh yeah, that's my great uncle, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Your great uncle has a building named after him at A&T? That's why you went to A&T? How did we not know that? And like, anyway, but it's really cool when you find these different links to the past. I've been a nerd here recently just about our family tree. On my
Hmm.
grandmother's side, we have a family reunion every few years, and one of my cousin's job is to like keep going through census records and DNA records and whatever she can find. And her job is basically to bring new cousins to the reunion every year because we're finding more branches of the family. And so every 4 years, we're finding like, oh, we had cousins that moved to Detroit and they run this thing or that thing. And it's like, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
I was just watching this documentary called Descendant, which came out a few years ago. It's produced by the Obamas, among other people, but it's about this community in Mobile, Alabama, who basically, after the slave trade was outlawed, this one rich white dude is like, you know what? I bet I can like import some slaves and nobody will find out. Imports slaves like well after slave trade is like abolished or
Hmm.
whatever, brings them there to Mobile, burns the ship, sinks it, and now there's just all these 110 slaves, that are there right before the Civil War ends. So Civil War ends, they get their freedom, they kind of establish themselves in this community. And the documentary is about like how the town has changed, but how these descendants have been told this story from generation to generation, and they've kept it alive basically like the griots in Africa. But because there's
Mhm.
no ship, there's not really any proof that it happened. It's like, oh, is it just like an old folk tale? Like, is this really where we are?
Yeah.
Short, sorry, spoiling the documentary. They find the ship. And then there's questions on like, okay, what do we do with it? You know, what do we do? What is our place in the town? What does reparation look like? And so on. And that story is still ongoing. Those people are all still alive. But it's like, that's crazy to
Yeah.
be able to say, we came from this ship. Here is the ship. It's all true. And I can trace down from my mom to my great great grandfather to the village in Benin. Like, and that is just amazing to me. The resiliency, the pride that comes with that, even as, like you're saying, like, you know, there is oppression. There's still very real consequences of the Middle Passage, and those effects are still there. But it's like, I don't know anybody else that's been through that and
Yeah.
somehow also produced LeBron James. You know, in the documentary, you find out that, oh, well, if you do more research after the documentary, you find out that Questlove is actually a descendant from one of those people on the slave ship.
Wow.
And it's like, what? And so it's just
Well, it's
crazy.
wild too, just because so many people don't have that, right? Like so many people's family trees kind of fray and break
Yeah.
somewhere, along the way, and it's just like it's a mystery. Not even like, how far back it goes, but all of the different directions that it took. You're just kind of like constantly searching. And I feel like for a lot of ple black people, um, it is kind of that search. I just read, I don't know if you've ever read this book, Searching for Zion, which is about this woman's kind of quest to find the proverbial Zion,
Mm,
like in real life. She's going to Israel, and she's going to Ethiopia, and she's going to Jamaica, and all of these places that are kind of mentioned as like the black homeland, or like where, black people can go to have a certain sense of freedom and equality. And it's like, again, not to spoil the book, but it is kind of like, no, obviously there is no one place. But I think she kind of exemplifies that journey of continuing to always be looking for something to settle into, just
mm,
because, as specifically, African Americans, if you're from Africa, you have Africa, right? You have, whatever your country of origin is. And you can always point back to that. But, for so many people, and even in, Jamaica, or, parts of South America, my mom is Puerto Rican. And so, even, in that, like, there's so many parts because of the slave trade, and because of how records were either kept or purposely not kept, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of have to leave it up to, did somebody think it was important enough to mention, my great 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 grandfather,
mm,
or where they just kind of, throw those documents out with whatever. And so, I love that you're able to not only have those family reunions, but then keep adding to them, because that's got to feel like, in terms of not just like growing that connection, but being able to have something to look forward to in 4 years, where you're just like, who else is going to show up? Like, what else are we going to discover about our family and ourselves?
right. It is, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's one of those things like you don't necessarily, I don't know. It depends on the type of kid you are, right? But it's
Yeah.
like I definitely wasn't like, oh, this is great as a kid. But now I'm like, it's my favorite part. I'm geeked up.
Yeah.
Um, so that, you know, kind of in that vein, well, a couple things. One, you open the book with the Ozzie Davis quote, and maybe just because I saw Ozzie Davis's name, I can't get him out of my head. And then I'm reading Melvin and June, and they very much feel like Ozzie Davis and Ruby D. And I don't know if that part's intentional, if I was just reading that into it, but well, so for those who don't know, my bad. Ozzie Davis, an American actor, activist, Ruby D, an actress. They're a married couple. You may remember them as the the old couple in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing.
Hmm.
Right? He's like hitting on this lady the whole movie, and she's just kind of playing coy. But they very much feel like if Black America collectively had grandparents, it would have been them. and I
Hmm.
get that vibe, like just being so in love with each other from Melvin and June. Does that inform them at all?
It's interesting because the couple that I drew the most inspiration from is Thelonious Monk and his wife Nellie.
Mm,
Um, because Thelonious is not just a very interesting character as a person, but like I think a lot about just what that relationship meant to him because if he was alive today, I'm sure they would have diagnosed him with all manner of things. But like,
mm,
first and foremost, something along the lines of, bipolar disorder. And then, another thing along the lines of just extreme social anxiety, which is like a really interesting contrast because, he played in front of hundreds of thousands of people, but like couldn't make it through an airport,
mm,
without his wife, like he was just one of those people who like, if he wasn't doing that thing that he loved, like I'm not out doing whatever. I don't want to be, involved in any of this. There's a documentary about him called Straight No Chaser, where his manager is showing him like an encyclopedia and they find his name in there and they're like reading out the entry and Mugga's like, what does that mean? And it's like, well, it means that you're famous. And he's like, I'm famous. Ain't that a bitch? Like, I don't want to do that. Um, and so I wanted to have, these characters who hopefully do feel like, very lived in their relationship and their love with one another. Um, and these two characters who you can kind of really feel like what it means for them to be together
mm,
because in that relationship with Thelonious Monk and his wife Nellie, like I feel like a lot of people may on the outside looking in be like, well, what is she getting out of this? You know what I mean? Like he's kind of this almost this neurotic wreck, that she's having to carry around from place to place. And like that can't really be, great at home or, wherever else. But anybody who knew them and talked about them, was always like, Monk loved Nelly like
mm,
nothing else. You know what I mean? Like as much as he loved music, he wasn't gonna get an airplane, to go perform, in another country. He would do it for her though, and
mm,
she could get him, to kind of to do a lot of these things. And on the other side too, it's just like I think she not only obviously loved him, but like was so supportive of his art and his journey she made his clothes and clothes for like other, jazz performers. Like she made sure he got his money from the jazz clubs. Like she booked his travel. Like she was not his official manager, but like she
mm.
did everything a manager would do.
Right.
And I always thought their relationship was something really special and, wanted to try to find a way to have a version of that here where you have, this painter who like, his work is all over the world in all these different museums. But if he had it his way, he'd never leave the house. He'd
Mm,
never do any of the stuff. And, you have his wife who loves him, but is also like very much a success onto herself. You know what I mean? She is an art dealer for him and for other people. And is very much like a businesswoman, entrepreneur. But to have both of them together and to have them, as an older couple as well, I really wanted to show just a black couple who had really made it through, so
mhm.
many things together, are still together, and just how strong of a bond they have.
Yeah, what I love about their relationship, or at least what we see of it in issue one, is it's very much rooted in love. I think a lot of times by the time a couple gets that old, their marriage can kind of look and feel like a business arrangement where
Hmm.
like one is keeping the other straight, but it's like, oh yeah, your ties are over there. But it can feel loveless or soulless. But there's a moment in this book where, they kind of decide to put the day behind them and just rest in one another. And I'm like, that we don't see that in comics. Like, I love that moment. Um, I have so many more questions, but I don't want to keep keep you
Sure.
forever. Another one I had though, right? Because you're from Maryland, but this book is set in Oakland. Like, why not set it in Silver Spring? What makes Oakland important to the story?
When I think about Oakland, there is such a kind of rich history of not only Black creativity, um, but Black history in and of itself. I mean, whether
Mm,
you're thinking about the Black Panthers, whether you're thinking about, like, I don't know if you saw it, but just yesterday there was the E40 NPR Tiny Desk,
yeah.
uh, which is just like, uh, being in Baltimore, Oakland feels kind of like a sister city where
Mm,
it's like, just down the road is San Francisco, Baltimore, just down the road is, Washington, D.C., this bigger city that kind of feels like it gets all the attention and like has all the gravity. Um, and, people assume like it's the same thing, like if you told anybody in Oakland that they had anything to do with San Francisco, that's a fight on
right.
site, because like there's two different cities. We're not the same. It's not the same thing. And that the Oakland pride, and just that identity, I really thought it would be a strong setting, specifically for again for a story about Black history.
Mm,
Um, and, just to have this couple kind of have settled in where it's like, again, if they could live anywhere in the world, I think Oakland is the kind of city where even now, like there's still crazy gentrification from all of the tech, overgrowth. But the people who live there are very much just like, we're going to preserve as much of this history, as much of this as we possibly can, not only just because it means so much to us, but because it means so much in general. Like we feel like it is important, period. I mean, historically, period. And
mm,
so, to have them kind of be in that town, or also, the thing I also I get the sense similar to Baltimore is like it's just weird, it's like it's a weird place, and I think that that weirdness and that eccentricity is just kind of part of, the fabric of Oakland, the
mm,
same way it's the fabric of Baltimore. There's a guy that I would see who lived here every day riding his bike in a different 90s basketball jersey. I don't know where he was going to. I don't know what he was doing. You know what I mean? But I was just like the jersey game was deep.
yeah.
And also like, he was on the same bike, the same route every day, going somewhere, headphones on, music blasting. And people kind of like that feel just like that's the neighborhood. Like if that guy wasn't there anymore, it would feel very different. Even though I don't know him, I've never spoken to him. Like he's a part of my day. He's a part of the surroundings. And so, Melvin is very much that same thing where people are like, oh, it's the weird painter guy
Mm,
from up the block. You know what I mean? I don't talk to him. I don't know him. You know what I mean? But he very much informs what this neighborhood is and, the people who live here. And so, I also wanted to have him be a character in the neighborhood itself where people are kind of like, it's not even that they don't pay attention to him, but it's kind of like you can be as weird and as strange as you want to be. Nobody's going to bother you. You know what I mean? Like we actually kind of respect you, because
mm,
we know who you are. We're not going to like get in your business, but having that kind of relationship where, even though Melvin isn't social or outward or like, wanting to be in the spotlight. Like there's a reason he and June chose to live in Oakland specifically.
mm. Now, with you talk about this book being like a love letter to those who paved the way. We've even now we're talking a lot about this being a book about Black history. Um, and in this first issue, there are several like Black history deep cuts, like people I didn't necessarily know. I had to look up a couple. Um, Samuel Marlowe being chief among them. I'm like, wait, what?
Hmm.
That was such an interesting story to me. Um, one, two questions, right? One, are these figures that you grew up with? Like, did you learn about these like later in life, or did you like research them specifically for this project? Um, and then two, like, what is it about history that felt like it was urgent to infuse into this now?
a lot of these figures are people that I came upon specifically for this book, and I think that was part of the joy of working on the book is like I like you, I didn't take as many Black history courses in college, but being in college, like that was the first place I heard about, the move bombing. That was the first place I heard about a lot of different historical figures that I was like, that's a person, or like, whoa, that event happened. And so I've always really enjoyed picking up these stories, as I go along, and whether I'm reading them in a book or watching a documentary or somebody just like starts talking about something. I don't know if you've ever heard the Drapetomaniac podcast that Michael Harriot did.
Hmm.
Um, it's basically like Black history as a variety of like different skits, but they're all real stories about, real historical figures or real historical events. And even just like the idea of like drapetomania was like a made up condition that this white psychologist came up with to describe runaway slaves. Like they have drapetomania, like they want to get free. Like that's unusual. Like they shouldn't want that. And so,
Quick
like
editor's
if
note
you
I'm gonna
were,
insert real quick. My bad. Michael Harriot is a great follow on Twitter. He's a
Mhm.
historian. And I first came across him just through these super in-depth Twitter threads. Something will
Yeah.
happen in pop culture, and he'll be like, well, actually, this is how we got here. And they're funny while being wildly informative. He wrote a book very recently called Black AF History, which is
Mhm.
great. If you're a Black history nerd, pick up that book. Now I got homework. I got to read this. I got to find this podcast. Sorry, continue.
Oh, the podcast is very much an extension of the book. You know what I mean?
Okay,
So if you enjoyed that book, like it's got a bunch of like guest celebrity, voices or people who come on and do stuff for it. So like it's really dope. But even through that, like there's stories about this town in Oklahoma where like Billy the Kid and like all of these bank robbers thought, uh, okay, we'll rob all these banks, but not this one in this black town because we've heard like they'll kill you, they'll run you out of town.
mhm.
And but the like this gang was like, nah, like we're gonna go in there, we're gonna take all this money, and like literally the whole town showed up with guns and like ran them out.
Wow.
And so like there's all of these stories like that where you're just like, this is amazing. Like this is
Hmm.
incredible. Like if school was just this
Hmm.
all the time. You know what I mean? Like that's exactly what I love. So as I was going along and thinking about, well, who can I include and what do I want to do? Chief among them, I was like, it would be, I could make a book where Rosa Parks showed up and Malcolm X showed up and, all of these people showed up. And like, I love James Baldwin and like all of these other writers. Like, I could have them be a part of it. But it wasn't even that I certainly think they are extremely important, but there are so many other people who like you will never hear about unless you go out of your way to learn about them. And so, for example, I was like, there's going to be a point where Melvin needs to do some detective work. He's going to need to, kind of pick up some clues to try to figure out what happened to June. And so he's going to need to get in touch with a detective. Were there any famous Black detectives? Like, was there like a first Black detective? Was there like what was going on? And I came upon Samuel Marlowe, who, if you're not aware, is the inspiration for Philip Marlowe, which is crazy because A, that's a white man, and
Hmm.
B, like you would think that that is just a original character that
Hmm.
like I mean it's got his name, you know what I mean? They basically
Right.
just changed the first name, so it's not even like, oh yeah, like vaguely inspired by maybe kinda, it's like no verbatim. And like
Yeah.
Samuel Marlowe would like retell his stories and they
Mhm.
would just write it down. And it's not, I mean, obviously, the Philip Marlowe stories are obviously fictional, but like so many of just the things about detective work and how that worked were taken directly from his notes that he would tell Raymond Chandler, which again is crazy because like can you imagine a black man in the 1930s doing anything. You know what I mean? Like that's got to
Yeah,
be very different than how, like if he just showed up at your house and started asking you questions, even though this was in California, like that's probably not going to go well. So like it was very interesting to know that's where that came from. And so there's a lot of other figures throughout the series that I would kind of like hit upon something and be like, okay, can I go deeper? Is there another level to this? Is there another person that I could find that's maybe not so surface level? And so that was one of the real joys for me of kind of going about this series is like, who can I discover? Who can I find that not only fits the situation, but is also just like a really interesting figure that I think people would really enjoy learning more about and should know more about. It shouldn't be kind of hidden away because that's unfortunately again the crux of so much of Black history is like if you're not looking for it, if you're not going out of your way to find it, it's likely that it's never going to come up. So
for sure. And even with that, right? Like it's already hard to find Black history, right? And if headlines are to be believed, it's about to get a lot harder. Um, and I mean, it's not even just headlines. My sister does cancer research, and thanks to a couple of executive orders, part of her research is like studying healthcare disparities, right, among
mhm.
women, but then also minority groups. She sent me this list of words that she's no longer allowed to use in her research papers, right? Uh, Among them, Black women maternal mortality, right? Like just crazy thing. Like just if you say the word race at all, it's like, yeah, no funding
Yep.
for that, right? And I've been reading stories about like school districts getting pressured and like they're erasing that. I can't remember which district it was, but like straight up was like AP African American history does not count as a history class toward graduation anymore. Like just crazy stuff, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And you're writing this book, this creator owned book, right? Kind of putting your money where your mouth is at a time where this is all happening. Why, it's easy to be like, okay, well, why do this, right? But is there a fear? Is it a defiance? Like, what's driving you?
So I started working on this book, as I said, like coming out of the Milestone Summit.
Hmm.
And so that was, maybe like 3 or so years ago. And at the time, it wasn't like Black history was, like stable. There was
Hmm.
still, attacks and certain things. And, you know, DEI, quote unquote, wasn't like, the battleground that it is now, but it
Hmm.
was. Um, still a lot of talk about various things, revolving around Black history, and just history in and of itself. And so, as things have continued to escalate and go along, like it's surreal to watch, not just because I'm working on this book, but just generally to hear that you would remove Harriet Tubman's name from something that's about her. Like, who
Right.
is this memorial about now? Like, what do you like? How does this even work? Because so many of these things are kind of asinine and crazy just for the hell of it. Like, it's
Hmm.
not meant to make sense. It's meant to be destabilizing. It's meant to disorient you. It's meant to kind of get you, questioning so many different things. And again, for businesses and other places, like it's meant to put the fear in them in terms of like, well, if you want this funding, you need to comply. You need to, you know, get these things out of here. And I mean, I was going to make this book regardless, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
This is just the book that I wanted to make. But even more so now, I feel like there's a couple of different themes, surface themes and then themes underneath that I feel like are really important to me. And seeing the way that things are playing out now, I think are going to reverberate even more. Obviously Black history and the importance of Black history. I think it's not even just that Black history isn't taught, at a certain level in this country. It's like it's maybe not even taught at all. And this was before, all
Mm-hmm.
the critical race theory talk and DEI talk. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you went and looked at certain textbooks in certain states, you would say, what?
Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah.
But then on top of that, I think there has always been, if you really dig down into it, right? Like the controlling narrative surrounding white supremacy, surrounding a lot of the ideas behind this country have always come not just at the cost of Black people, at the cost of, indigenous people, at the cost of Asian people, the cost of Hispanic people, in terms of erasing their roles in creating this country, because then it looks like we didn't have any say, any place, any stake in this country. And so I think it's more important than ever to really amplify those voices, LGBTQ voices, as well, because if you were just to read the standard K through 12 textbook, you wouldn't think gay people existed. You
Yeah.
wouldn't think indigenous people existed past the original founding of this country. You wouldn't think Black people existed past the civil rights movement. You wouldn't think Asian people had any real say or any real play in the creation of this country. You wouldn't know about, fights that immigrants had. I mean, even the idea of whiteness itself as a creation, when you think about the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, all of these people who came here originally were on the bottom with the rest of us. And
Mm-hmm.
then slowly but surely, as the numbers were needed, you're white now, you're white now, your voice counts now, your vote counts now. We need you to be able to uphold this, right? And so at the heart of that is knowledge, right? If you don't know any better, who are you to question anything? If you've never been told, or if you don't even have the ability to think about critically all of these things, you're not really ever going to make those connections, right? Another theme of the book, you'll find later that one the major antagonist of the book is a sentient AI corporation from the future, right? And so right now, when you're talking about AI and you're talking about the way that it's being used in specific, right? Like, it's not to say that a majority of technology is racist,
Mm-hmm.
but it is to say that a majority of technology has shown itself to be racist, whether it is face recognition technology, whether it is, I mean, even if you think about in some places, the sink, the automatic sink will not pick up people's hands because it's not the right, color, or it doesn't, pick up in the infrared. So like there's a lot of things that are just done and made not at the exclusion of Black people intentionally, but like we're just not even considered in its creation, right? And
Yeah.
so when you look at
Autofocus on my
artificial
camera.
intelligence,
All of
but
it.
when you look at artificial intelligence, it is racist. Like it always becomes racist at some point. It always becomes a Nazi. It always becomes like, some horrible thing. And it's because you're feeding it all of this stuff. And at a certain point, it's going to start to internalize a lot of these things. And there's a reason it's internalizing certain things is because these are kind of these status quo things that are thrown about. You don't really think about them at all, but like this computer is taking it in and it's saying, oh, okay. So this is how I treat those people? Okay, great. You know what I mean? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to make calculations or anything in terms of humanity or really taking in a large scope of stuff. And so, a lot of what it is that, Melvin is a conduit for it to just absorb Black history and make it a viably commercial thing. I mean, when you think about Black History Month, when you think about a lot of these corporate things that are thrown out there to be appeasing to us. And now you look at we're coming on, the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And then the way that a lot of these companies who made a lot of these big proclamations in 2020 about what we're going to do to change their culture, be more inclusive, uplift Black voices. Now it's like we don't have that money anymore. So good luck, thanks for
Right.
coming. Um, and so, there's a lot of discussions there as well where I'm seeing these things play out in real time. And, I'm not thinking like, this is great for my
Okay.
comic book.
Yeah.
But I am thinking more like, damn, I think, it's always difficult because I never want to think of like this book as important, in the way that like it's going to change your life. But I
Mhm.
am starting to more and more think about it as like, I think people are going to gravitate to it just because it's talking about something and highlighting something that I think is on a lot of people's minds. I think there is a lot of fear out there for people who, work in academic fields, who work in um, fields that are set to preserve history and culture.
Mhm.
Because if it's that easy, if somebody can just say, well, no funding for you. You look at NPR, you look at PBS, these publicly funded things that we just kind of take for granted that produce all of this amazing content that try to highlight, history and stories that kind of go under the radar. Like if that's gone, you're going to be missing, a huge chunk of how people get informed and how information is sent out. And so, as much as I can, I think I really want to get this book into the hands of people who really are passionate about that because I think the more that we can push back
Mhm.
and really say this is important, these people are important, this history is important, our history is important. The harder it's going to be for a lot of these things to get displaced because that's what they're counting on is people to say, well, I guess, yeah, we don't need that museum or, you can get rid of that Black History course or whatever. And instead they're finding, even at these town halls, people are showing up and they're saying, you're doing what now? With my money, with my tax money? Like I didn't vote for that. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
even with a lot of people, being deported, they're like, hey man, I may have voted on the grounds of, something along these lines, but not without due process. Like there's still laws in this country, there's still things here that
Right.
matter. And so the hope is that enough people have I think outrage is a great word. I think outrage and anger and, just disgust are all apt words in terms of describing hopefully how people are feeling. Because if you're feeling afraid, that's what they're counting on. But if you're feeling, outraged, emboldened, ready to fight back, that's kind of what they're not hoping for, not predicting. And so, hopefully this can be a book that helps people yes, think about Black history in a certain way, but also helps them say, and I want more of it. I don't want this to go away. I don't want books like this to go away. I want even more. That's what Sinners has been so great at doing is people saw that movie and they said, yes, like I absolutely want more movies like this that kind of exist in this world with this kind of history. I don't want to see this go away. And so the more that we can kind of embrace these things and push back, that is a way that we can make our voices heard in terms of what is important to us.
Yeah. Yeah. This book is great. Well, I've only read the first issue, but I'm just gonna assume the rest of it's great as well, right? I do think it's timely. It's for as much as we've been harping on sort of the importance of the history, right? Like, I don't want to be buried in this podcast that this is an entertaining book, right? Like, we got AI robots, we got a robot panda. Like, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in these pages alongside the sort of brushes with history that we get. And you can read as much into the history or as little as I guess as you care to. But yeah, it's a timely book. It's a relevant book just for the times that we're in. Um, and I'm really excited by it. This is one of those things like I, I feel like I'm a 90s kid and I feel like I take for granted the fact that we sort of grew up in a cultural renaissance period, right? Like it was black people on TV
Mhm.
everywhere when I was growing up. I never thought I was like some minority because everybody that was cool that anybody wanted to be like looked like me. And for kids that grew up on like Happily Ever After on HBO, like watching like
Mhm.
all these fairy tales with black people in them, or Fresh Prince or Martin or Bear and Jamal, whatever, right? Like Static Shock. It's really cool to be able to pass something like this on to my kids, right? Like,
Mm,
oh, and like, here's a really fun book, but also check out who that guy was. Like, look it up. And it's like you see people's eyes light up, like, oh, wow, this is real. I could do this. I can be a part of this. So thank you for, like you said, this is a creator-owned book. This is something that like takes a lot of passion. It's not like, oh, hey, you got a pitch laying around for Aquaman. All right, cool. Write this little mini series, right? Like there's a lot of effort, a lot of groundwork that has to be done for something like this to come out. So thank you for bringing this story to the forefront. And I didn't even get to talk to you guys about how great Adigan's artwork is in this book. It looks amazing. If you read The Shadow Cabinet, Adigan, his sort of debut in that book was this page where Anansi shows up to
hmm
the fight. And it's just like it looked like nothing else in the book. And mind you, this is a book being drawn by Darryl Banks mostly, right?
Yeah.
Like to be able to steal a show when Darryl Banks is writing a book or drawing a book, that's insane. So you know what you can expect from the art in this series. And I imagine as we get more into the action and sort of find our antagonists and stuff like that, Adigan gets to shine even more. Um, but this is awesome. And so the final order cutoff for this, if you want to pre-order this, you definitely will want to pre-order this at your local comic shop is July 7th. So you got a little bit of time to go ahead and pre-order this. It'll be in stores August 6th. So mark your calendars.
hmm
And
Yeah. And oh, I was going to say, I would like to follow up on the Adigan praise because I will say being just around him, at the Milestone Summit, we would all kind of, had time to ourselves. Obviously, we're in Burbank, so like you could get to LA if you really wanted to, but I mean, you were kind of, just in the DC kind of compound for a bit. And
mm,
so, at the end of the day, when we were done with everything, we'd all go downstairs, kind of hang out and, get some food and whatnot. Adigan was always drawing, in his sketchbook. And I would always just kind of look over at what he was creating. And I was just like, if I could one day, have the opportunity to collaborate with him, like, I think we can make something really cool. And so the fact that not only is it happening with this book, not only is it happening with a creator-owned book, but the fact that we got to do something together so quickly after that experience. Um, and just like collaborate throughout all these ideas, like the panda petunia, he just put
mm,
that in the book, and I was like, yes, great, let's do that. There's a lot of things that you'll see later on in terms of not only just his creativity, but his ability to handle the action, the smaller, intimate moments, the bigger sci-fi elements of it. Like he's so good already, and it's just like, man, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you know what I mean? Like he's only going to get better. And so I'm very grateful to be able to have created this book alongside him, but just to be here at the beginning of this journey, because I think he's got not only a long career, but like you're going to see his name on a lot of things.
mm, for sure. Yeah, no, it's definitely a bright career ahead of him. So, and for you as well. So I'm really excited to see what comes of this. And this won't be the last time you're on the show. I can't wait to see what else is coming from you. And so, with all that said, people want to follow you, follow your journey in comics. Where can they find you online?
You can find me on all the socials at JRSosa18, JRSOSA 18. Um, if you are in the market for another podcast, I do a podcast with my friend. It's called White People Won't Save You. It's a podcast about white savior films. And each week we reimagine a white savior film and recontextualize it through a Black and POC lens. And so we've done everything from Green Book to we just did the Sheena movie from the 1980s. We've done small, crazy movies about, white karate guys to Oscar-winning films. So if you are interested, White People Won't Save You Pod on Instagram and all the other places. And you can find the show wherever you podcast.
All right, real quick, how do you reimagine driving Miss Daisy?
We did that movie.
Oh yeah.
And it was difficult because there's some movies that are somewhat rooted in historical fact, and so like this is a movie similar to Green Book where it's taken quote unquote from the life of the writer. And so we're like, I guess if we have to keep it quote unquote historically accurate, we were again more concerned about, well, like Morgan Freeman is a black man in the 1960s when all of this stuff is going down and is certainly got his opinions about things. I think it's really interesting, a lot of those movies where whether it's The Help, whether it's Green Book, whether it's Driving Miss Daisy, there's kind of this non-interest in the lives of, the domestic staff of these white people because like we're talking, we know a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
We're when it's all the day is done and we're kikiing together wherever we all hang out at, like it's just story after story after you would not believe what she said today. You would not
Mhm.
believe what I had to do today. And so I think taking it from Morgan Freeman's perspective, because it doesn't necessarily have to totally omit Miss Daisy at all. Like she can be a part of it. But I think you give that character three dimensions. He has a life, he has children, he has dreams, he has goals. I don't think he just wants to drive this white woman around for the rest of his life, even though he more or less did that. So like involve him in the time period in the history. Like there's a scene where she goes to an MLK speech and he's like in the car, like can he not go to a rally? Can he not go? Can he not be involved in things in some way, shape, or form? So, like, finding ways for him to not simply just be the driver for her. Because, I mean, again, the
Mhm.
whole moral of the story is like, see, they can get along. And it's like, well, he works for her. So, like, if he wants a job, he kind of has to get along. He can't not, you know what I mean? Even the moments of tension where it's just like, oh, he's going to tell her off. It's like, not really. She gets to be really mean to him and he kind of pushes back sometimes.
Mhm.
And that's the dynamic. So like having it's certainly not going to be an equitable relationship, but like taking less of the focus away from Morgan Freeman being just this totally like submissive figure to Miss Daisy and more so having him be a three-dimensional character who sure, maybe he does say no to her sometimes. Maybe he actually does have something to do, cannot drive her wherever she needs to go. His daughter needs to go to the hospital. He's got to go, transport these people to, this rally. He's got things going on in his life. He's not just at her beck and call whenever. So I think that's more or less what we came up with in terms of like how can we give him more uh, autonomy and really make his story more meaningful to the times that he was living in, not just like he was there also.
This archive is like 3 years long. I know exactly what I'm about to be doing for quite some. And you did a Huck Finn episode with David Walker and Kwame Brown. That book is amazing.
It is.
Big
Yeah.
Jim and the White Boy. Um, man, this is fun. This is cool stuff. So I'm gonna link to that podcast in the show notes. I'll leave link to all your socials, all Jordan's socials in the show notes as well. I'm gonna stop talking before I make this a 3 hour episode. But you guys, don't forget Ancestral Recall is up for pre-orders right now. Final order cutoff on this first issue is July 7th. So just go ahead and call up your shop. Tell them you want to go down for the whole series from Ahoy Comics. Um, I'll even put the little diamond code, if diamond codes are still a thing,
Yeah.
in in the show notes, so you can pre-order it a little bit more easier. And yeah, with all that said, thank you so much for your time, Jordan. I'm really excited about this book. And for all the rest of you out there, Stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.
Comics are dope.